Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. I'm Geoff Mosher, and of course, we have our data and analytics expert, Sam Finkel, with us. As promised, we are turning the page away from the summer mailbag series and into the 2025 series. And you know what? The analytics/story fairy just hit you right in the head last week, Sam, as the Eagles bring on a new cornerback. They trade for Jakorian Bennett from the Raiders. And I would say he's a player, just based on some of the interactions I've had with people, that a lot of Eagles fans aren't really familiar with. And so what you've done a great job is doing your best to help them get familiar with him, not only from his background, but also analytically how he profiles and compares to the current cornerbacks who are competing for a starting job. So we'll take a look in this episode on the newcomer and try to figure out if this guy is going to just be another body or a real competitor for the starting job. But it's pretty exciting to have a new name into the mix.
Absolutely, especially this time of the year.
Yeah. So how did you go about deciding before we sort of dive into the charts and the numbers? How did you go about deciding what kind of analytical picture you wanted to paint for the viewers and the listeners?
Yeah, so I figured a good way to do it is kind of just look at every corner's last season performance that is in the room or was in the room last year. The relevant names. So we're talking, Jakorian Bennett, obviously, AdoreeJackson, KeleeRingo, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay, and Isaiah Rodgers.
Good. That's a good mix of corners, and that's people who are the Eagles fans are familiar with, and that's good. So, and I don't want you to give your entire summary now. We're going to go through the numbers first, but did you have like a preconceived notion or a perception of who Jakorian Bennett was before you started this?
Yeah, I watched a little bit of his film before I even started this, and I felt pretty comfortable with a lot of what he did. Doesn't mean he doesn't have weaknesses, but there were definitely some things I felt pretty good about that he brings to the room that's unique and different than what they currently have, which is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. He's obviously a very good athlete. We'll get into that. I mean, the athletic testing is through the roof, and that's something that the Eagles really look for in pretty much, all the players that they bring in, but especially from that position. Someone who I in the league who's very familiar with the Eagles roster described Jakorian Bennett to me as a little bit of a miniature version of KeleeRingo. He's not as tall and big as Ringo, but he feels like, much like Ringo, Bennett is a good athlete who's sometimes struggled being overly physical, handsy, and also for having really good athleticism, can be a little bit, I think he said stiff hip, but it's almost more like lacking great fluidity. You want your corners to be able to just flip those hips really easily. And usually the smaller athletic ones can, but that's not his number one area of expertise, which makes sense because if it was, he'd probably have been a first round pick.
No, and that's fair. And it's interesting that you've already kind of created this, analysis between Ringo and Bennett, because if you remember, they both were fourth round picks, one pick within each other.
Right.
So, and they actually, interestingly, both were Houston's picks at one point, which is even another wrinkle that people don't necessarily talk about. But I know they talked about they're the second pick of the fourth round and the third pick of the fourth round.
Right.
But they are very similar. So if you look at their breakdown, and we can just do that before we even get into this analysis,
Sure.
Ringo ran a 4.36 and Bennett ran a 4.3 flat. You look at the vertical jump, and that's where you really see the difference, right? KeleeRingo he had a vertical jump of 33.5. Jakorian Bennett, on the other hand, had a vertical jump of 40.5. So a pretty significant difference right off the rip there. And you look at the broad jump, and it's 10.2 for Ringo and 11.1 for Bennett. So I think he's an even better athlete. And then if you look, how we did those production athleticism score analysis earlier in the offseason?
Yeah, of course.
You look at them, and I have the numbers for both Bennett and Ringo. And for Bennett, he had a production score of 63 and an athleticism score of 99. 99, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But you look at Ringo, his production was 79, but his athleticism was 77. So I think he's a different caliber of athlete than Ringo. And I think we saw some of the limitations of Ringo's athleticism, particularly when he was trying to cover Jamar Chase.
Yeah. I didn't hold the back shoulder completion against him as some did, because I've seen some really good corners get back shouldered by Jamar Chase before. But to your point, the out route, you gotta be able to get there instinctively, make the tackle, wrap him up, and prevent that. And he did look. He showed exactly what we talked about for being a pretty good athlete. He was a little slow to get there, and then I guess being slow was that he just couldn't change his direction on that out as Jamar Chase broke to the outside, and then so he had a lunge at his ankles and did not come up with the tackle. So yeah. So Jakorian Bennett will now get, he'll get that opportunity, and he's already gotten in there to run with the first team, and this will be a big week for him with the Browns coming to town.
Absolutely.
All right, let's get into some of the charts that you put together, and we'll go through each one and kind of explain what there are to show. And obviously for our listeners, we'll make sure we're very clear on what it is. The first chart is NFL 2024 cornerback statistics, right? So these are just your basic standard cornerback stats.
Yeah, and I just want to be a little bit explicit on the outset on this.
Yeah.
Is that the touchdowns allowed? I use the NFL Pro. I use that PFF statistics. I used NFL Pro for everything else, and so they're going to be a little bit skewed when you look at only one source. And the reason I don't like to typically do this, but NFL Pro allows you to watch. If you click on the numbers, watch how the touchdowns were allowed, and the touchdowns it allowed that were granted to Bennett, they had 2 of them. He did not allow the touchdown on either one of them. And then I watched AdoreeJackson's. I watched all of them, and I was like, none of these are actual. Like they were in the area, but he wasn't his responsibility clearly in coverage. And I think PFF does a better job of capturing that. So I use PFF for that. I really don't like to mix and match. And when I do, I want to be really explicit on it. I did mix and match a little bit here.
All right, great. No, that's great. You did it in the right way, in the thorough way, to paint a better picture and give more accurate analysis. So I'm sure everybody can appreciate that.
I appreciate that you saying that. So,
so what do we have? Let's go through Jakorian Bennett and the others.
Yeah, so I think it's important first off to just look at snaps, because we talk a lot about which positions, right? When you play more, there's volume statistics, and it's inverse when you're on defense, right? You're going to allow. It's not for tackles, right? You'll have more tackles as you play more snaps typically, but you'll allow more yards also. So I think looking at the snaps is really important to contextualize this analysis. So, I mean, you look at Bennett, he had 434 snaps before his shoulder injury took him out for the season. AdoreeJackson provides a pretty good analog. He has 406 snaps. Ringo really didn't have much last year. He had 109. Obviously, Mitchell had 906, so that's a lot more. So you just got to factor this in a little bit. DeJean had 594, which is pretty close. It's a lot more. It's more than Bennett, but it's close. Slay 664, which again is more, and Rodgers also a pretty decent analog at 316.
Right. So I think in this comparison, the only thing that we really should qualify is that of all these 6 guys, right, seven guys, DeJean's snaps by and large came from the slot, whereas everybody else came from outside. And you're defending a different route tree. In some cases, you're defending more, right? Because slot receiver has become such an important role in the NFL these days. It's almost become a more high volume role than occasionally the outside receiver.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. And honestly, if we were really talking about the slot, you would have like Avonte Maddox in there too. Like there would be other corners we talk about too. I just wanted to give familiar names just because these stats in a vacuum don't make much sense.
Right.
So I think just seeing guys, I put Cooper DeJean because everyone knows how well he contributed, and especially with Quinyon Mitchell. What I don't think people realize, and what we'll get to, is how impactful Slay and Rodgers were, and I think that these charts will kind of show that. And because that there is such a void that left between those two's absence.
Right. Got it. So what jumped out to you from these 7 names that you put together here?
Yeah, I mean, tackles were relatively high for Bennett and AdoreeJackson considering their snap count. I mean, they're both pretty solid.
That's important, by the way. That's you can't underrate that in a Vic Fangio defense. Vic wants his corners to be able to tackle.
Yeah, and also the yards allowed, decent stuff, nothing too crazy. But if you look at, just the three that are being evaluated for the cornerback 2 position, Jakorian Bennett had the least yards per reception allowed at 12.8, and Ringo had the most at 24.3. When you look at that, contextually, you look at Quinyon Mitchell, who had 11.1, Cooper DeJean, who had 7.2, again, playing a different position. Like you said, it's important to understand. Slay at 12.2 and Rodgers at 9.8. So, you look at it, it's a little bit worse than where Slay and Rodgers were, but it's pretty comparable to that versus Ringo, who's just in a completely different world.
Yeah. And again, that's weighted by the fact that he's at 100 snaps versus 400 snaps. So there would be probably, you would think, some regression to the mean the more he played. However,
you'd hope
the stats are the stats. I mean, that's a pretty a high yards per reception allowed number.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other stat I would like to bring up is the rating, right? The quarterback rating when targeted. What I think is really interesting, and I think paints a pretty good picture, is Bennett is also the best in that at 86.7. And then you look at, the and you got 83.8 and 88.8. So he slots right between where Slay and Rodgers were, which I think is a really good indication of his ability when he's playing. Again, Ringo is at 149.3, but again, you would hope that regresses to the mean if he has a higher volume. And AdoreeJackson's at 92.2. So, they're not that far off, but, there's a significant advantage for Bennett right there.
Yeah, certainly. I think your point on how, if you look at his 434 snaps, that's more than Isaiah Rodgers played last year, less than Darius Slay, but right in between there, and have a comparable QB rating against, a comparable yards per reception, and 0 touchdowns allowed. That's pretty impressive because Isaiah Rodgers allowed 2 touchdowns on 316 snaps, and Bennett allowed 0 on 434. Now, there's a whole lot of context that can go involved surrounding the type of touchdown, but we're only working with the stats that we've got here, and I just think that jumps out to me. The point you were making about Slay and Rodgers.
Absolutely, and I think once we get into the advanced stats, you'll see even clearer picture on this.
All right, well, let's do that. Advanced stats and cornerback stats. We'll try to get them both on the same screen here. All right. What do we have? There's a lot of letters and numbers and percentages here.
Yeah, honestly, I think really just go through the chart, right? So catch percentage allowed, we're going to start with. So that's just the, targets, receptions divided by targets. That's how you determine that. Right. Then the expected catches based on NFL Pro's algorithm, how many should actually be allowed, like based on their formula. Then their catch reception over expected is just, that percentage subtracted by the expected. For corners, you want it to be less, right? It means that you're allowing less than expected. So a negative number is preferable there. Coverage, EPA, that's just, expected points added. It's always in the context of the offense. So a negative number is also better because you're taking less points. There are less points being scored by the offense in theory.
Right.
Target percentage is just how much they're targeted, divided by the snaps that they played. The average separation is just that. It's how much the receivers separate on them. Tight window is less than 1 yard of separation. Hawk percentage is a measure of how often a player disrupts a pass divided by targets as the nearest defender. And yards after catch per reception, also very self-explanatory.
Yes. So some of these numbers are a little bit all over the map, right? I mean, I think what jumps out is that he had a minus 10.2 on catch reception over expectation, which means, as you point out here, it was expected that 61% of these balls would be completed, but only 51% were caught. So that's a good job by him, right?
Yeah.
there was more separation on average against him than the other two, a higher degree of separation, right? And I guess more tight window throws completed against him. Is that fair enough, or is it less?
So it just means he's forced less tight windows.
Okay.
So it seems like his recovery to the ball is like there. So again, tight window is less than 1 yard of separation. So when he gets separated on, but he has the speed where he can recover. That's what these statistics sort of tell. That's the story it kind of tells.
Right. And yet, despite that closing speed, the yards after catch per reception against him are higher than Jackson's and Ringo's, right? No, I'm sorry, just higher than Jackson's. Not Ringo has a higher one. So it kind of interesting stuff. And again, that everything, you try to separate the context from, we don't know the plays, right? We just know that these are this is the culmination of all the plays, pass plays against him.
Absolutely. And so you just look at these numbers, and I mean, Bennett in just the cornerback battle, he wins 3 out of the 5.
Right.
So I mean, that's a pretty, or maybe it's 6, but either way, he wins half of them, which is a pretty good spot to be. Yeah. So I think that's a good way to kind of describe him. Ringo loses 4 out of the 6. So that's, again, another spot to show maybe he is not necessarily the answer. And Jackson is kind of in the middle on a lot of these areas.
Sure. I feel like the best way to look at this, you can disagree with me, is really comparing Bennett more to Jackson and then Slay and Rodgers because of the snap counts and because of the role, right?
Sure.
Gene, again, slot. Kelee, just such a small sample size compared to those two that it's hard to know where the stats would be if you projected it out to have as many snaps as Bennett, as Slay, as Rodgers.
No, for sure. And I think part of what I realized when I was doing this analysis is how much of a mistake the Eagles made by not re-signing Rodgers. Especially at his market value. I mean, you look at his catch rate over expected, it's also minus 10.6.
Yeah.
You look at his average separation, it's 2. It's the best out of all these guys.
Right.
His tight window percentage is 27.3%. His hawk percentage, 18.2%. And he's a sure tackler, which you can see with the yards after catch per reception at 3.3, which is right kind of where Darius Slay was. And I do think if you look at Slay's stats, the Eagles are really going to miss that. They're going to miss the consistency they had from Slay and Rodgers.
Yeah.
And I really, if I have one criticism of the team, it was not re-signing Rodgers. I think that was a misstep.
For perspective, that was not a mistake of evaluation. That was a decision of cash versus cap.
Yeah.
Right? They were shedding, and they weren't going to pay certain monies for certain players.
Yeah, and look, I get it, but I think what you're losing in that value, it's probably part of the reason they had to make this trade or felt like they had to make this trade, is because there is a vacuum there.
Sure. And then so you broke down the stats from the preseason game last week against the Bengals, which is good because now you got a little bit more of an even target share, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it helps quite a bit to kind of understand where each of these players are at. Something I didn't include in here that I probably should have was, their snaps, but they're all relatively similar. So if you're looking just at their pass snaps, everyone is pretty much ranging from 11 to 19.
Gotcha.
AJ Woods had 11. Perry Nickerson had 19. Everybody else is either 16 or 18. So it's relatively consistent among everybody.
Yep. And we knew that Ringo and Jackson gave up yards and struggled. Jackson gave up 4 catches for 45 yards, 11 a catch. Again, they were going up against the Bengals first teamers, but he's a 9-year vet. He's got to go out there and represent himself as well, which, as the numbers show, not so great. 104.2 quarterback rating against him.
To be fair, it is one of the premier offenses in the NFL too. So, and against both Higgins and Chase are 2 of the best receivers in the league, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to face tough, competition. So I totally understand that part of it. And I do think that, having the Eagles starting defensive line would help quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
and probably mitigate some of these numbers to an extent. But it's still,
Possibly.
they were not promising numbers. That the performance was not anything that's encouraging for anybody who was watching it.
Right. And I know we're Penn State homers, but I actually think Tariq Castro-Fields had a pretty nice camp. I don't know if he's going to make it. I could definitely see him back on the practice squad. I like how he's kind of tall and long armed, but I thought I've seen him make plays in camp, a couple of pass breakups. He generally seems to be understanding how to play within Vic's system.
Yeah, I really like Tariq Castro-Fields as a person too.
Mm-hmm.
He was on the team when I was there, and he's one of people I really respected. And I honestly really would love to see him get more of an opportunity, especially because it's wide open. I don't think he'll have an opportunity to compete for the spot, but for a depth role, it would be pretty cool to see him make the team. But again, practice squad's probably more likely, like you said.
No doubt. All right. Oh, these were the other guys. I'm sorry. I forgot that the chart was broken up, but Parry Nickerson got in there. Eli Ricks has had a nice camp. Sam, he's really kind of coming on too. So
Yeah,
we call it a three person competition. And I'm not saying Eli Ricks is the fourth, but he's been on the team. They've kept him for a reason, and he's starting to show up a little more in practice.
yeah. Maybe we'll update this chart if see how it goes next week.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that is basically how we're wrapping up Jakorian Bennett there. I think the advanced stats were really interesting and really kind of paint a picture of who he is and the athleticism that he has and the success. For a bad Raiders team, he was a fairly successful corner. So it's not surprising that he's come in and already got first team reps and is considered in the mix for this job. What is your final summary on it? How do you see this thing playing out?
So Jakorian Bennett has consistently been overlooked and underappreciated throughout his career. He was a 0-star prospect, had to go to JUCO before going to Maryland. Didn't get a lot of respect coming out of Maryland, but he's proved everyone wrong. I don't think anything changes. I think he wins the job, and I think he plays pretty well. I do think it'll be a rotation for the most part, but I do think he'll have an opportunity to play early and often, and I think he won't disappoint.
It's a good point you're making. This thing doesn't have to be settled by week one. Vic can certainly continue it out. I mean, he's got to settle on somebody to start, but I've seen guys. If people remember in 2017, Ronald Darby got hurt for 10 games. Right after they acquired him, he played in the season opener, and then he was out for 10 games. And the Eagles juxtaposed Rasul Douglas, who was then a rookie, and Jalen Watkins. And he played both of them in different down and distances and situationally and got the best out of both. They went 9-1 in the 10 games Darby missed. So I think Vic can be creative here and he can figure it out and he can give Bennett more time. If he thinks Bennett eventually will be the guy who's best of the three, that might be by week 4 or week 5. You never know.
Yeah.
We saw that with Cooper DeJean. Cooper obviously had an injury, but he got inserted into the lineup in week 6 and then took off from there.
Absolutely.
All right. Also, I asked you to put together just some stuff on Darius Cooper, this wide receiver out of Tarleton State. Everybody's familiar with Tarleton State, who has really been lighting it up in camp. So what kind of data did you put together on him?
So it became very easy to do the data because I already did it, right? When we did the UDFA analysis, we already had that 3-year college statistic that I did. What I didn't do is rank him among the drafted wide receivers. But when you do rank him, and again, look, you have to factor in the fact that he played lesser competition. He did. I mean, but you have to be excellent against lesser competition to even be in this conversation, which he was.
Yes.
So, I mean, you look at him, with what he did in his last 3 years, and he had 158 receptions, which was 15th among the 32 drafted receivers. He put up 3,100 yards, which was 3rd. And that 3rd was only to Tet and Ricky White, but they both had about 50 more catches than him. So he put those numbers up with 50 fewer catches. So
that's pretty impressive.
Very much so. The yards per reception was 19.83, and he was only second to Dante Thornton, who got drafted by the Raiders, who had 1/3 of the amount of catches. So I think you have to understand, like, he had 50 catches and had a higher. So to sustain that high yards per reception is significant, even against lesser competition. And then he was first in touchdowns with 28.
That's really impressive stuff. And I'm going to piggyback off something you said. When I speak to NFL personnel people and I catch up with them and I try to get evaluations, we have a lot of conversations about how you judge players from Tarleton State or small schools. You know, our friend Clay Harbor went to, I think, Missouri State, right? And the common response is that when you're judging a player who plays at a level like this, what is important to see is that this player dominates the level of competition every single week. It can't be, you know, you dominated 8 games, but then there are 2 games against the 2 better teams in the SWAC or wherever you came from, the Sun Belt, right? You have to dominate week in, week out to be drafted or even be considered as a priority free agent. And as the numbers you just put together here, comparing him to drafted wide receivers show, he dominated the level. Milton Williams dominated at Louisiana Tech, week in, week out. It might have been Tech when he was there. They've changed it a little bit, but that's the point here. This is not flukish. This is not the result of a few good weeks where he, you know, lit it up and then he was pedestrian on every week. This guy, his stats are unbelievable.
Yeah, day in, day out, like you said. So he might have carved out a role. I mean, look, we have his statistics from the Bengals game there, and if you look at it across preseason, you rank it. He was 7th for targets. Mm-hmm. He was 2nd in receptions, 2nd in yards, 18th in yards per reception with a 50% threshold, and then 2nd in touchdowns, which again with 1. I mean, there was only 1 person who had 2, so in preseason. So.
And this was versus this is a comparison to every single wide receiver, right? In week 1. In week 1.
Yeah. Or preseason week 1.
Preseason week 1. Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I said it, so don't worry.
No worries. So that's really fascinating. I like this kid. What really sticks out to me just watching him in practice, Sam, is that nothing he's doing is sort of flukish in nature. Like, he's not making these 50-50 catches. He's not, you know, beating guys down the field 30 yards. He's just getting open consistently, getting targeted consistently, catching the ball consistently. And when you see that, that's actually a better thing than sometimes I always use Hank Baskett as an example of a guy who just came and made highlight reel catch after highlight reel catch and then wasn't that guy. I mean, he was pretty decent for an NFL player given that he went undrafted. But the point is, some of that flukish stuff goes away when the competition becomes just starters versus starters, and nothing he's doing though seems for him like out of the ordinary. He just makes the notebook doing the normal things, which is good for him.
Yeah, it's repeatable, right? I mean, what you're saying, it's hard to, you know, repeat that consistently. But when you get open, that's a technique that you can kind of rely on a little bit more. So I think that's an excellent point that you just made.
I look forward to maybe we'll do by the end of the preseason something else on him, because he's going to get more opportunities, I assume, here, coming up with at least the 2s and then even some 1s. He's already gotten some opportunity with the 1s, and maybe we can get some advanced separation data or yards per, you know, catch over expectation, things like that by the end of the preseason and see how he measures up.
Sure. One thing I'm interested in is if he'll play the slot. I mean, he had 2 slot snaps during preseason, which is 6.1% of his, you know, totals. So I'm very interested where they line him up.
Yeah, it'll be a great development for the Eagles who you know, don't exactly have, other than Anaya Smith, like a natural slot receiver. So yeah, really looking forward to that. I think the fans are excited about him now too. So Sam, great stuff. Yeah, they should. Thank you so much for the work on Jakorian Bennett, on Darius Cooper. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. And of course, we'll be back again soon. So keep listening and keep watching. Thanks to everybody who has tuned in. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. We'll catch you all on the next one.